On November 5th, 1975, the students walked out of Ambros's classes to protest the peer evaluation by Ambros's peers. As the students were walking out, one student came up to Ambros with an alabaster flask containing 1 quart of very expensive Pabst Blue Ribbon beer and gave it to him. But when Matthew, who was evaluating the class that day, saw it, he was indignant, saying, "Why this waste? For this beer might have been given to the political science department for our annual party." But Ambros, aware of this, said to him, "Matthew, why do you trouble this student? For he has done a beautiful thing to me. For you will always have departmental parties, but you will not always have me. In giving me this beer, he has done it to prepare me for my firing. Truly I say to you, wherever my case is discussed in the whole of Blue Earth, what he has done will be told in memory of him." Professor Thaddeus, who was skilled in the art of hunting, and Professor Bartholomew, who was a woodsman, sought to entrap Ambros in his talk, so they asked him, "Why do you transgress the tradition of the elders? For you do not require that your students take notes, and you do not force them to take tests." He answered them, "Did Socrates require his pupils to take notes? Did Socrates administer tests?" And they went away gnashing their teeth, and they did not dare answer him a word. Nor from that day did anyone dare to ask him any more questions. News of Ambros's remarkable teaching spread far and wide. Andrew, a student of political science who was regarded as an enfant terrible, and not without reason, desired to become one of Ambros's disciples. So he approached him and expected him to say, "Come, follow me." Instead, Ambros said, "Don't walk ahead of me. I may not follow. Don't walk behind me. I may not lead. Just walk beside me and be my friend." So Andrew walked beside him, and they became very good friends. And Andrew said, "Heinz, surely you will win your case." Ambros opened his mouth and said, "Truly I say to you, not even in Estonia have I found such faith." And on March 9th, 1976, Ambros sat at a table with the 12 political scientists, and he said, "Truly I say to you, at least one of you will betray me." And the 12 glanced at each other knowingly, and each said in his heart, "It is I." Then there was a very long period of silence, which was finally shattered by Mark Iscariot, who blurted out, "Is it I, Heinz?" And Ambros said, "Come off it, Mark. Who are you trying to kid?" Then Ambros said to them, "You will all accuse me of incompetence." Professor Peter, who was a brilliant scholar and a just and upright man, declared to him, "Though they all accuse you, I have not voted in favor of your dismissal, and I will never accuse you." And Ambros said to him, "Truly I say to you, before the cock crows, you will accuse me." Peter said to him, "Even if I must be fired with you, I will not accuse you." Ambros said, "You know that after 2 months I will be delivered up to be fired." Now, it was a well-known fact that Ambros could be found every afternoon in the sauna. So while he was in the sauna, Mark Iscariot came, one of the 12, and with him a great crowd of people who were carrying pens and legal pads. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I kiss is the man. Seize him." And he came up to Ambros and said, "Hail Heinz!" And Ambros said, "What on earth are you doing here, Mark? This is the first time I've ever seen anyone wearing a suit and tie in a sauna." And Mark kissed him, and Ambros said to himself, The last thing I expected was to be betrayed with a kiss from Mark Iscariot in the sauna. And it came to pass on May 18th, 1976, that Oxgoad wrote a scroll about Ambros, part of which said, "The conclusion of incompetence was reluctantly forced upon us." Oxgoad signed the scroll, which was to appear 2 days later in the school paper, and circulated it among his colleagues. When the scroll had gathered 11 signatures, Oxgoad took it to Peter and said, "Will you sign this?" Peter read it and signed. And immediately, while he was still signing, the cock crowed. And Peter remembered the word of Ambros, how he had said to him, "Before the cock crows, you will accuse me." And he went out and wept bitterly. But Peter, who was a just and upright man, repented, was forgiven, and walked in the paths of righteousness from then on. Ambros was brought before Dean Herod by the political scientists, who said, "Behold, Ambros of Estonia." Herod said, "Can anything good come out of Estonia? Bring forth witnesses." For some were to bear false witness, and their witness did not agree with John's witness. Professor Thaddeus, who was skilled at hunting, came forward and read from his evaluation form. On November 6, 1975, in Ambros's Soviet government class, the subject was political parties in the Soviet Union. Ambros was asked about Soviet political parties. He did not know anything about the party number. Thaddeus then charged Ambros with incompetence. Ambros, who was flabbergasted, replied saying, "This is the height of absurdity. If these statements don't backfire and destroy Thaddeus's credibility, I don't know what will." I can't help but come to the conclusion that for Thaddeus, the belief that the Soviet Union has a two- or multi-party system is a matter of conviction. I thought that every schoolboy knew that there is only one party in the Soviet Union. Imagine, if you can, a man like this let loose with students in the classroom. Is it not the height of irony that Thaddeus is charging me with incompetence? But Herod, who accepted the testimony of Thaddeus, asked him, "What do you infer?" Thaddeus said, "The inferences are too painful to draw." Then Ambros interjected, "Hear what the prophet Samuel Butler saith. Life is the art of drawing sufficient conclusions from insufficient premises." Herod then asked Thaddeus if he had any further testimony. Thaddeus continued reading from his evaluation form. On November 3rd, 1975, Ambros lectured for 5 minutes from old notes taken in a debate in the old main auditorium over 10 years ago. The debate was between spokesmen for and against the Soviet system. Ambros interrupted him, saying, "I hereby charge Thaddeus with deliberately perpetrating a cruel hoax. How could he have possibly known the age of my notes, and how could he say they were taken during a debate in the old main auditorium over 10 years ago? He wasn't even there then." Thaddeus had joined the faculty of Blue Earth State in 1969. "To the best of my recollection, no such debate did ever take place on this campus. Thaddeus is a liar. He should heed the proverb, 'A false witness will not go unpunished, and he who utters lies will not escape.'" But Herod believed the testimony of Thaddeus. The next witness was Professor Helen, who was the wife of Professor Matthew. She said the level of attention in Ambros's students was not high. Several read other materials during class, and several just seemed to tune out. Ambros answered, "If what you say is true, Helen, it could be taken as a sad commentary on education, or as the price we pay for allowing freedom? Take your pick. And she did not dare to answer him a word, for she did not believe in her heart that students should be given freedom in her classroom. Herod asked what her conclusion was, and she said, I reluctantly conclude that the criteria of competency have not been fulfilled. Ambros then asked her, well, why reluctantly? Are you sorry to see me go? She blushed and did not answer him. Ambros prayed that she might repent. Then Matthew, the husband of Helen, was summoned to testify. He said, Ambros does not correct the errors that students make in class. Furthermore, last November 5th, the student gave him a quart of Pabst Blue Ribbon beer in class. Ambros said, Matthew is obviously disturbed that he was not given a quart of Pabst Blue Ribbon beer. Otherwise, he wouldn't have made an issue of it. Matthew continued his testimony. Students dozed, stared off into space, and gave a general impression of inattentiveness and boredom. When the student had finished giving an oral report on the CIA, Ambros commented on how bad it was that some people saw a need to spy and snoop on other people. At that point, students turned around and looked at me. Ambros said, Matthew has just contradicted himself in a most obvious way. The fact that the students looked at him after I made the comment on spying and snooping shows not only that they were paying attention, but also that they were thinking and able to make a connection. That's laudable. However, Matthew also claims that the students were bored and inattentive. I'm puzzled by charges that are so incompetently stated. Priscilla was the next witness. She said, Ambros fails to encourage good study habits. Ambros said, but I'm in a university, not in kindergarten or elementary school. I always thought that good study habits were learned during the formative years, and that coming to or being in a university was one of the results of having good study habits. Priscilla continued her testimony. Thursday, February 1976 was a day to be remembered. Ambros interjected, like the day the Titanic sank. Priscilla said, Ambros devoted approximately 10 minutes to an inquiry into the personal problems of a Lebanese student, the individual who has delivered the report for the day. Ambros replied, just as a shepherd lovingly watches over his flock, so do I take a personal interest in my students. The student's family in Lebanon was in grave danger, and I shared his concern and anxiety. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your peer and hate your student, but I say to you, love your students and pray for those who hate them. For if you love your peers, what reward have you? Do not even the political scientists do the same? I love my students, and when they graduate, I tell them, behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, so be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. The next witness was Professor Bartholomew, who was a woodsman. He said, on February 23rd, 1976, Hines played a tape from CBS's 60 Minutes, which featured Carolyn Byrd, the author of The Case Against College. Ambros did not indicate how the recorded material related to politics. Ambros answered him saying, having eyes, do you not see? Having ears, do you not hear? What Carolyn Byrd was saying in that interview most definitely related to politics, students, educators, and even to you, Bartholomew. Herod asked, is Ambros incompetent? Bartholomew answered, do Hindus hold the cow to be sacred? Ambros is disorganized and ill-prepared. He is the least competent teacher I have seen in my 7 years as an undergraduate and graduate student in political science and in my 15 years as a teacher. I have graduate students who have not yet attained their master's degree who have done a better job of teaching a class for me than Ambrose's performance in the class I observed. Herod asked Ambros, "Have you no answer to make? See how many charges they bring against you?" But Ambros made no further answer, so that Herod wondered. And Herod, with the political scientists, arrayed Ambros in gorgeous apparel, one of Thaddeus's suits, and sent him to President Pontius Pilate. And Herod and Pilate became friends with each other that very day, for before this they had been at enmity with each other. When Pilate saw Ambros, he was very glad, for he had long desired to see him, because he had heard about him, and he was hoping to see some sign done by him. Pilate lit up his favorite pipe and asked him, "Are you the prophet of education? And is it true that you believe that students are entitled to freedom and should be treated with dignity and respect?" Ambros said, "You have said so. I come not to be served by students, but to serve them." Then Oxgoad tore his suit and said, "He has uttered heresy. Why do we still need witnesses? You have now heard his heresy. What is your judgment?" And the political scientists answered, "Fire him! Fire him!" And Pilate said, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Let him be fired!" The political scientists started to worry that Pilate might release Ambros, so they said, "If you do not fire him, we will charge you before the State University Board with failure to perform your duties. Then you will really be in hot water." Pilate's pipe dropped out of his mouth onto the floor, and he quickly grabbed a bar of palm olive soap and said, "Behold, I wash my hands of this matter." And he ordered Ambros to be taken away. Ambros said to himself, "I wonder what was in that pipe he was smoking." And as they were taking him away, Thaddeus said, "Hey, wait a minute, what about my suit?" Later that day, Pilate wrote Ambros's walking papers. He addressed the letter to Heino Ambros, the prophet of education, and it was written in Estonian, in Swedish, and in English. The vice president for academic orthodoxy, Margaret Madeline, said to Pilate, "Do not write the prophet of education, but this man said, 'I am the prophet of education.'" Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." Then Ambros had read his walking papers, said unto his wife, "Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but I have no job." And his wife wept. One of the disciples of Ambros, Andrew, asked him, "Why have the political scientists and the administrators fired you?" Ambros said, "This people's heart has grown dull, and their ears are heavy of hearing, and their eyes have closed, lest they should perceive with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their heart." Andrew said, "There must be something more to it than that." Ambros said, "I would not recite the political scientist's creed, which goes something like this. We believe in one chairman, all sovereign, maker of a huge salary and of dogmas and edicts, and in conformity the only begotten ideal of the chairman. And in the department which with the chairman in conformity is worshipped together and glorified together. We do not believe in academic freedom, which suffered under Pontius Pilate, was dead and buried and shunted into hell. And those who say students should be treated with dignity and respect, and students are some of the same substance or essence as professors, and that grades are bunk, or those that allege that the present system is alterable or changeable or incorporeal or exorable or mutable or not eternal or not divinely instituted, These the political science department anathematizes. The end.